When I began this series, I set out to explain the wine world in terms of the grape flavours that link so many of the world's wines. Of course, there are all sorts of regional variations, but it's the grape variety that has the single greatest influence on how a wine actually tastes. More and more wines today are named after the grape variety they're made from. Merlot, for instance, although there are still lots that aren't, such as Pomerol or Saint-Emilion. So far, then, we've concentrated on the handful of grapes that are now world famous. A bottle of Chardonnay or Cabernet Sauvignon will generally sell itself, no matter where it comes from. That's fine, except that as more and more vineyards are converted to these international varieties, the vanilla and chocolate of wine flavours, there's a real danger that wine producers may abandon forever traditional indigenous varieties that have become perfectly adapted to their particular corner of the world and produce truly distinctive, exciting wines.
This is a perfect example. Piedmont in northwest Italy, meaning literally at the foot of the mountains. Here and only here, the magical Nebbiolo vine flourishes, making wines heady with violets, tar and the region's buried treasure, white truffles, worth a fortune. The dogs are palmed off with biscuits. This upmarket mushroom is worth millions of lira. Barolo and Barbaresco are two small villages in the hills around Alba. They're also the names of Italy's most revered wines. On a well-guarded farm in these hills lives Aldo Conterno, one of Barolo's great traditionalists.
The wines made by the Nebbiolo grapes usually takes the name not from the grape, but from the town, from the region where it is grown. First is the Barolo. I say first, probably the people from Barbaresco, they would put first Barbaresco. I put Barolo, Barbaresco, Roero, Nebbiolo d'Alba, Nebbiolo Langhe, 5 different wines with the same grape. The Nebbiolo comes from nebbia, and English is fog. So because the Nebbiolo, being a grape that lasts to get the maturation, sometimes it goes about the end of October. And at that time we have some days that the fog comes and covers the hills. But the Nebbiolo grape, it's very strong. It can stand it 1, 2, 3 days. It doesn't suffer. So, and that one, the sun comes up again and we can pick them without having any damage. It can only be in this area. It's not up to the goodness of the winemaker. It's up to the land that can let us to make this great wine. But it's the land. I'm sure that if Jesus Christ at the last dinner, if he had served the Barolo, Judah wouldn't have betrayed him for sure. Yeah.
Talking of dinner, this part of the world is gastro heaven. In Barbaresco, just a few restaurants away, is Italy's most famous wine producer, modernist Angelo Gaia. He charges outrageous prices for his wines, but like most people around here, seems to spend more on food than he can possibly earn.
Be happy, my dear. Not bitter, all right.
In a region which has hardly changed since the Middle Ages, Angelo Gaia was regarded as a traitor by many, starting a local revolution. He began by sacrificing one of his best Nebbiolo vineyards to plant it with the famous French grape, Cabernet Sauvignon.
What did you decide to call your Cabernet Sauvignon when you launched it?
Well, the Cabernet Sauvignon is called the Darmagi. Darmagi is an Italian, a Piedmontese dialect, and it means what a shame, what a pity. In effect, my father, that is 86, and he is a strong believer of Nebbiolo, like me, like myself, but he didn't like at all to have a Cabernet Sauvignon planted in Barbaresco. So when he knew that I had this idea, and when he saw the vineyards planted, and he pronounced this word, and so we decided to call Darmagi the vineyard and the wine.
Why did you decide to plant Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay here?
All over the world, there are two basic tastes, the Chardonnay taste and the Cabernet taste. So many customers all over the world, they know the good Cabernet, the taste of good Cabernet and the taste of good Chardonnay. So I believe that my strategy was to demonstrate a little bit to this kind of people that this land, if I would be able to produce a good Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon, of course they had to look at my flagship wine, that is Barbaresco, that is made no Cabernet Sauvignon, no Merlot, no Pinot Noir, but is made by Nebbiolo, that is our most important grape variety.
Worse was to come. Out went the giant old barrels in which Nebbiolo had traditionally been matured for years. In came short, sharp aging in small, new French oak barriques. When the locals saw this lot, they called them dog kennels. But Gaia believes in them so passionately, he buys his own giant stash of French oak in advance and seasons it in the open air so that it loses its harshness but none of its heavy, oaky flavour.
The small container, what is called the barrique, it leaves to the wine a certain taste as the spices, as the vanilla. When we buy a new barrel, a brand new barrel, before we put the wine in it, we filled it up with water and from 5 to 8% of salt in order to make the wood to be neutral, because the Barolo is a wine that it's already very rich on a tannin, so it doesn't need to take any more tannin from the wood. The problem for us would be to take out the tannin, not to add it. It's going to be a unique wine. Probably people don't like it. I'm not saying it's going to be the best. It's going to be unique. And the people that want this wine, they can only have it if they buy the wine, the traditional one. Now the Cabernet and the Chardonnay, they have become very international, very well known. Every person knows what's the Chardonnay, what's the Cabernet, so that's why probably many people, they are starting to plant that type too.
You produce the Chardonnay, don't you?
Yes, not me, my sons. Yes.
In a way, Barolo's a very inconvenient wine. I mean, the modern consumer wants to be able to buy a bottle and drink it almost immediately, very soon.
Well, sure, that's right, yes, but we don't care much about those people, because we make, altogether, we make about 7 million bottles of Barolo. So that, if you can consider that 7 million bottles, it's one bottle every 10 person in Italy, a year. So that's very little. So if we put all the world together, we got very few bottles. So we don't want to give it to everybody, only to certain person that they have the right palate to appreciate the Barolo.
I respect the quality and the wines of producers that are made in the traditional way. But it's possible, in my opinion, shortening the time, of the long aging time, is possible to maintain the more integrity of the wine. And the wine is more alive. This is my impression. But, you know, who knows? And the leader of today, what we believe are leaders of today, we have to verify next 20 years. And when finally we will drink again the wines made in the beautiful vintages, 88 and 90, 89 and 90, and we will drink in the 2010, at that time it will be possible to judge who did well during that time.
Buonasera, buonasera. Gosh, this is fantastic. It's like another century.
Yes, it's probably 1,000 years that the bread is made this way. So we continue the tradition. We have always continued this tradition as long as we can. I don't know how long we can do it, but we rather make our own bread than not buy it.
Is bread and wine the only things you produce on your farm?
No. We do produce wine, bread, and salami. We raise the pigs, and after, when in the fall, in the month of December, we'll kill them and we make salami. We make our own salami. Yes.
You've got my perfect meal:
Yeah,
wine,
yes.
bread, and salami.
That's right. Yeah. So. You go ahead and try if you like it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very well cooked. Yeah? Very well
Perfetto.
It's the same tune in Spain, Ribera del Duero, on a dusty plateau north of Madrid. In the small town of Pesquera, it's Spain's national day, and the locals have much to celebrate. In less than a decade, Pesquera has become world famous, thanks to a single grape and a single man, Alejandro Fernandez. Fernandez now virtually owns this town and clings zealously to all its traditions.
What do you use this place for?
A pasar la tarde y cantar, contar chistes. Aquí de política nada, ni de mujeres un poco, de vino a todas horas.
Mujeres un poco, eh?
Vino a todas horas.
For as long as anyone can remember, Pesquera was known for only one thing: sugar beet. Alejandro Fernandez left school at 12 and worked in these fields, harvesting the beet by hand. Hard, physical graft he never forgot. Years later, he started a small workshop, doing rudimentary repairs to agricultural machinery. It was then he had his brainwave. A mechanical beet harvester. It was to make his fortune. With the money, he planted his first vineyard. Fernandez made wine as it always had been made in this region. Until recently, almost all of it for local consumption. Out of national pride, Franco had forbidden imported grape varieties. Instead, Spanish vine growers soldiered on in isolation with their own indigenous varieties, many of dubious quality. An exception was Tempranillo. So common here it's called simply Tinto, or the tinted one. Although it's blended into Spain's best-known red, Rioja, it was virtually unknown outside Spain. Fernandez was to change all that. When America's most powerful wine writer, Robert Parker, discovered the fruits of this sort of bucolic scene, he raved about Pesquera. And when Bob says buy, Americans buy. Pesquera and Tempranillo had arrived, and Ribera del Duero became a fashionable new wine region. Ribera del Duero is also the roast lamb capital of the world, or at least that's what I think he was saying.
Muy bien. Venga. Ahora, esto lo he asado solamente para ti. Puedes comerlo tranquilamente. Sí, yo te echaría esto. Coge, deja esta.
Okay.
Esto está más bonito, más mejor para los dedos. Esto está muy bien.
Alejandro, why do you grow only Tempranillo?
Oh, el Tempranillo es la mejor uva del mundo, maja. Esto es un placer. Comerlo y vale para postre y para hacer uno de los grandes vinos del mundo. Es diferente, mira. El Tempranillo es la uva madre de las uvas. Porque tú te tomas un Cabernet cuando tiene 30 años, y entonces el último sabor es como un Tempranillo. ¿Tú no habías probado nunca así? Es increíble. Es el único vino, es de los 4 vinos del mundo que se hacen varietal. Pesquera es uno de ellos. Es Petrus, algo de la Fi, y la Tache esa, Román Contini de la Tache, francés de la Borgoña, y Pesquera. Son los 4 vinos del mundo que es de una variedad.
Too much modesty. But...
Y el Tempranillo aquí es perfecto.
Because of Fernandez's success, Pesquera has now been joined by a host of Me Too Ribera del Dueros, of extremely variable quality. Fernandez too is expanding, audaciously tearing vineyards out of the very rocks to plant more Tempranillo, the world's great undiscovered grape, he says. Spain, like everywhere else, is threatened by grape invaders. Cabernet Sauvignon spreading like wildfire.
Y si existe el Tempranillo en la Ribera del Duero, es por Alejandro Fernández, que lo he defendido a carta y espada. Porque dije, en la Ribera del Duero tenemos lo mejor del mundo, que es el Tempranillo, que no en todos sitios se da el Tempranillo. Y yo, el que quiera plantar Cabernet, que lo plante. Pero yo creo que debemos seguir plantando Tempranillo, que tenemos éxito en el mundo con el Tempranillo. Y de Merlot y Cabernet está el mundo lleno. ¿Para qué vamos a complicarnos? Y vamos a quedar sin nuestras cosas de nuestros antepasados, que son las uvas estas. Lo que los españoles tenemos que apoyar y defender, pero con fuerza, es el Tempranillo, que es lo nuestro. Como hacen los franceses con su Cabernet, que lo defienden a carta y espada. Es lo que tienen que hacer. Pero la moda de vender y hacer dinero pronto es lo que existe. No se da el Cabernet. No vale. Aquí lo que vale es el Tempranillo. Y es una pena que la gente mire para otra parte cuando tiene esto tan bonito. ¿Qué es este Tempranillo? Esto es lo que es.
Back in 1989, along with hundreds of other Brits attracted by a weak franc and the French way of life, by which we really meant eating and drinking, we decided to buy a holiday house here in France. I deliberately avoided Bordeaux and Burgundy on the basis it would be far too much like work, and eventually we settled here in the Languedoc, in the sleepy south of France. And now, what do I find? All of a sudden, this is the most dynamic wine region in Europe, if not the world, with all sorts of incomers flying in to invest in the potential here. With its reliable sunshine and relatively low land prices, the Languedoc's been described as France's new world. Its absence of reputation means that there aren't too many restrictions. One of my closest neighbours is an Englishman called James Herrick, who arrived soon after me.
With scant regard for tradition, he uprooted the local vine varieties and grows nothing but the grape invader, the all-conquering Chardonnay.
We wanted to make full-bodied dry white wine. The fundamental issue on that choice, I think, is what makes good wine over a 100-year period. And what we think is that Chardonnay and the flavour it produces and the style of wine you can make for it has been a favourite for 100 years and will continue to be so.
Not here.
Not here, not here. But wherever it's made, well made, I mean, if you take Burgundy, for example, it's always been a successful flavour over hundreds of years.
Well, you say take Burgundy, for example, you'd have to say take Burgundy, full stop, more or less, wouldn't you? Because apart from Champagne, there's nowhere else it's been growing for 100 years.
But there's been a consistent demand for Burgundian wine, if you know what I mean, because I think that flavour and that taste is a long-term proposition.
And you think it's the grape, not the characteristics which Burgundy brings to the
I think it's both. I think it's both. I think if you plant Ugni Blanc in Burgundy, you're not going to get particularly good wine, sorry to say. And I think if you plant Chardonnay here, you won't get Burgundy wine either, but you'll get a very flavourful, full-bodied dry white wine. So it's as simple as that, really.
Wouldn't the wine world be a really rather dreary place if everybody said, look, everybody loves Cabernet, everybody loves Chardonnay, let's plant them?
Very dull indeed. However, the wine world is a lot less dreary place now for people making good wine. And frankly, I'd rather have bucket loads of good, well-made Chardonnay around the place than bucket loads of rather badly made Ugni Blanc. The market will win. The market will win. When someone turns up with a wine that says, this is the lesser spotted Vermentino, and it's absolutely terrific, and it's worth £4.99 or £6.99 or £2.99, whatever, and you should go out and buy it, everyone will go out and buy it. But it has to be good. So I think this sort of indigenous grape variety issue is rather interesting, because either interesting or irrelevant. I think it's interesting for people in the trade, but irrelevant to most people.
I mean, it is, I have to admit, there are one or two people who've proved that you can make it commercially interesting to go around looking for unusual grape varieties. I mean, do you know Randall Graham, Bonnie Doon in California?
Sure.
I mean, he goes searching all over the world for obscure varieties and seems to be doing very well, thank you.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. And only thing that matters is, does it taste good in the glass? If it's been made from Mourvedre, whoopee-doo. If it's been made from Chardonnay, that's terrific. If it's been made from Tempranillo, that's good too. I really don't think it matters.
Shall I compare thee to a Chardonnay? Thou art better balanced, fruitier and more temperate. Rampant Chardmania my fealty will not sway. Vangry or not Vangry, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler on the palate to suffer the grey Rieslings and Arrowwoods, the outrageously successful White Zinfandels, or to take legs against a sea of swill and by opposing no end stacks. The problem with Cabernet and Chardonnay is that they're acutely boring. They're tremendously boring. It's chocolate and vanilla every single day. The other problem I have with them, they don't go with food that people eat. I think that Chardonnay is the perfect wine for what I call cholesterol-infused cuisine. So if you're wanting a meal that's just pure butter and cream, Chardonnay is your wine. But that's not the way people eat, at least in the States, especially in California. People are into eclectic cuisine, food that has a lot of spice and flavor, piquance. And Chardonnay is a very delicate kind of wine, very nuanced wine, and that's not the kind of wine that goes with this sort of food. Riesling is, and Petit Manseng is, and Pinot Grigio, and Tokai Friulano, and...
You just like the sound of the words, don't you?
Of course. I saw the best palates of my generation deranged by short-chain tannins, recoiling embittered in astringent rictus, who expose themselves to dangerously high levels of new oak, barriquesters bathing in phosphorescent cellulobiose glow. I sometimes say disingenuously that I'm not a radical bomb thrower, that in fact I'm deeply conservative. I say this with all irony, of course, but I'm conservative in the sense that I really do believe in growing grapes that really belong where they're grown. And I believe
here in California, you have a relatively small, narrow range of varieties, don't you? So you have to bring in things that might belong there, theoretically, yeah?
So I believe in the necessity of maintaining diversity. Diversity is crucial from an ecological standpoint. When these things disappear, they're gone forever. From an aesthetic standpoint, and just from a pure, personally, from a pure curiosity. I'm just wondering, how will Petit Monseigne fare in California? And if I don't do the experiment, I'll never know.
So you've fallen in love with Rhone varieties, fallen
Yes.
in love with Italian varieties next.
Yes.
Well, where now? Where next?
I have to say that I've grown especially enamored of German grape varietals lately, and if the climate were not so dicey, meaning the
Too hot.
incongruity of our climate and their climate, I think those grapes would be fantastic for California. In fact, I'm so crazy about these grapes that I would like to form an organization called the NRA, the National Riesling Association.
Count me in, definitely.
For a long time, he would drink only Francese. He was enamored with the Borgognonese until he discovered the discreet charms of the Bordelaise. His fickleness just drives me crazy.
Well, I know you quite well. I've shared quite a few bottles with you. And you come clean about which grape variety really thrills you to drink.
That's very unfair. Riesling. Riesling. I say it loud and clear. Riesling. My favourite white wine.
Frizzante and still, red wine and blush, he never met a grape he didn't want to crush. Finito.
It should be obvious by now that the overall quality of wine being produced in the world today is higher than it's ever been, and it's getting better every year as more and more producers consciously set their sights on the world's wine consumers. And the fact that there's an international brigade of wine critics and an army of well-educated wine technicians means that everyone's really trying to make a better wine than his neighbour. But, as ever, there's a price to pay for this progress, as more and more of the world's wine producers adopt basically the same equipment, techniques, goals and grape varieties. We're in danger of losing some of the individuality of wines that uniquely express the place they come from. So, one final bit of advice. If you come across a name that's completely unfamiliar to you on a wine list or a shelf, it's almost certainly worth trying. It's probably only there because someone passionately believes in it. Just as I passionately believe that every time you take a sip of wine, you can enjoy history, geography, botany, psychology, and an immense amount of sheer physical pleasure.